Welcome to the channel Coinexa USA, and before we dive in, let me ask you something that might just stop you cold. What if the most valuable thing you own right now isn't your car, isn't your house, isn't your savings account, but a simple, small, seemingly ordinary quarter sitting forgotten in a drawer, a jar, or the bottom of your bag? I know that sounds impossible. I know it sounds like the kind of thing people say just to grab your attention, but stay with me here because what we're about to uncover today is not a theory. It is not speculation, it is a documented, verified, collector-confirmed reality that has left even the most seasoned numismatists speechless. And it all starts with a coin minted in 1998 at a facility so busy, so industrious, so focused on volume that a tiny, almost invisible twist of fate slipped right through quality control and landed, undetected, into everyday circulation. And that coin, that beautiful, extraordinary, misunderstood piece of American minting history, is the 1998 D Washington quarter. A coin that, on the surface, looks like every other 25-cent piece you've ever held, but underneath that familiar face of George Washington, underneath that standard reverse design, there is something so deeply, so profoundly different that when collectors first began identifying it, the numismatic world went absolutely electric with excitement. Now let's talk about value, because that's what you're here for, and I am not going to make you wait. This coin, the 1998 D Washington quarter, in the right condition, with the right characteristics, with the right errors and varieties that we're about to break down for you, has been valued by elite collectors and auction specialists at up to $107 million. And I need you to sit with that number for a moment. $107 million for a quarter, for a coin that was designed to be spent on gum or dropped into a parking meter. And yet here we are, talking about a piece of pocket change that could single-handedly rewrite someone's entire financial story. And before we go any further, I want you to do something. Stay with us today, because later in this video we are going to be talking about coins that make even this one look like just the beginning. Coins from 1997, from 1995, from 1990, each one carrying a secret more staggering than the last. And trust me when I tell you, the further we go, the more your jaw is going to drop, so do not touch that back button, do not scroll away, because the coin coming up after this one has a story so wild, so unexpected, that even I had to double-check the numbers before I believed them. But first, let's go deep on the 1998 D. The D mint mark, of course, tells us this coin was struck at the Denver Mint, one of the most productive facilities in the entire United States mint system. And in 1998, Denver was operating at an extraordinary pace, pushing out hundreds of millions of coins to meet the demands of a booming economy, a growing population, and a nation that needed change, literally. And it is precisely in that kind of high-volume, high-pressure environment that the most spectacular minting errors are born. Because when machines run fast and oversight becomes stretched thin, the opportunities for something extraordinary to slip through multiply dramatically, and that is exactly what happened with certain strikes of the 1998 D Washington quarter. Now, the specific variety that sends collectors into a frenzy is one where the die itself, the hardened steel tool that stamps the design onto the blank coin, shows evidence of a double die obverse, a condition where the hub that transfers the design to the die made contact more than once at a slightly different angle or position, creating a subtle but unmistakable doubling effect on key features of the coin's face. And when you look at this under magnification, when you tilt it under a proper light source and examine the lettering, the date, the profile of Washington himself, you begin to see it. A ghost image, a shadow of the design sitting just slightly offset from the primary strike. And to the untrained eye it looks like nothing, it looks like a smudge, like something you'd wipe off with your thumb. But to a collector, to someone who knows what they're looking at, it is the equivalent of finding a winning lottery ticket that nobody else recognized. And then there are the die caps, the rotated dies, the OFF center strikes, all documented anomalies within the 1998 D production run that elevate certain specimens from face value to fortune, and the combination of any two of these factors on a single coin, graded at MS67 or above by PCGS or NGC, the two most respected grading services in the numismatic world, creates a piece so rare, so aggressively sought after, that bidding wars at major auction houses have pushed prices into territory that most people can barely comprehend. Think about the history surrounding this coin. 1998 was a fascinating year in American culture and economics. The country was in the middle of an unprecedented period of prosperity. The dot-com boom was in full swing, people were optimistic, spending freely, and the mint was pumping out coins by the billions to keep up with the velocity of commerce. And somewhere in that flood of metal and motion, a handful of quarters emerged that were fundamentally different from their billions of siblings. And those quarters entered circulation, passed through hands, rode in pockets, clinked in cash registers, and most of them were spent. Gone forever, melted down, lost to time. But a precious few survived. A precious few were noticed by sharp-eyed people who set them aside, who tucked them into flips and folders and safe deposit boxes, who understood instinctively that they were holding something the world would one day pay an almost unimaginable price for. The grading of this coin is everything. The difference between a circulated example and a mint-state gem is not just a matter of a few $1,000s. It is the difference between a coin worth maybe $50 and a coin worth millions. And that is why condition is discussed with such reverence in the collecting community, because a 1998 D Washington quarter that has never been touched by anything but the mint's own equipment, that shows full original luster, sharp strikes on every detail, no contact marks, no bag marks, no evidence of human handling, is essentially a perfect artifact of its moment in history, a frozen snapshot of American manufacturing at its most prolific and, in rare cases, its most accidentally magnificent. Collectors have reported finding specimens of this coin in original mint sets, in bank rolls purchased on a whim, in inherited coin collections passed down from grandparents who had no idea what they were preserving, and every single one of those discovery stories carries with it that same electric jolt of disbelief followed by the slow, building, breathtaking realization that life just changed. Completely, irrevocably, enormously changed because of a quarter. And this is why we always say, always check your coins, always look twice before you spend, always pay attention to the details that most people ignore, because the difference between a millionaire and someone who just bought a cup of coffee might literally be the quarter they almost dropped into the tip jar. Now, I promised you that we're just getting started today, and I meant every word of that, because coming up next, we have a coin from 1997 that takes everything we just talked about and amplifies it. A coin with a minting story so dramatic, so filled with the kind of twists that belong in a Hollywood script, that by the time we're done you're going to be tearing through every coin you own with a magnifying glass and a racing heartbeat. And after that, we have coins from 1995 and 1990 that carry price tags so staggering they make the 1998 D look like just the warm-up act. And believe me, you do not want to miss what's coming, so stay right here, keep watching, because the best and the most valuable is absolutely still ahead. Next, 1997 D Washington quarter. Now I want you to imagine for just a moment that you are sorting through a jar of old coins, the kind of jar that sits on a shelf for decades collecting dust while everyone assumes it's full of nothing but pocket change that couldn't even buy a candy bar. And you reach in, you pull out a quarter, you glance at the date out of habit more than curiosity, you see 1997 D, and you almost put it back, almost. But something makes you stop, something makes you hold it up to the light, and in that moment, in that single suspended heartbeat of a moment, everything changes, because what you are holding is not just a quarter, it is not just a relic of the late 90s. It is one of the most aggressively pursued, most passionately debated, most financially explosive coins in all of modern American numismatics. The 1997 D Washington quarter, a coin that has been valued at up to $116 million by elite collectors and auction specialists who have spent years chasing specimens worthy of that extraordinary number. And before you say anything, before that number sends you into disbelief, I need you to stay with me, because by the time I'm done explaining everything about this coin, the history, the errors, the rarity, the auction records, the finds, you are going to understand completely, and more importantly, you are going to realize that this coin is out there, it is in circulation, it is in collections, it may be sitting in your own home right now without your knowledge, and that possibility, that breathtaking, life-altering possibility, is exactly what makes numismatics one of the most exciting pursuits on the planet. The Denver Mint in 1997 was operating under conditions that were in many ways even more intense than the years that surrounded it, because 1997 represented a critical transitional period in American coinage, a time when the Mint was simultaneously managing the enormous demands of standard production while also preparing for the seismic changes that would come with the state quarters program launching in 1999, and that internal pressure, that organizational complexity, created an environment where certain quality controls that should have been ironclad became, in isolated instances, slightly compromised, and from those compromised moments came coins that are now worth fortunes. The primary error type that defines the most valuable specimens of the 1997 D Washington quarter is a phenomenon collectors call a strike-through error, where a piece of foreign material, a fragment of wire, a sliver of cloth, a tiny chip of debris, became lodged between the die and the blank planchet at the moment of striking, creating an impression of that foreign object directly into the surface of the coin, and the result is a design that appears normal at first glance but upon examination reveals an intrusion, an alien shape pressed into the metal with the same force and permanence as the coin's own intended design. And this kind of error, when found on a coin already notable for its production anomalies, creates a numismatic perfect storm of rarity and value that collectors will pay almost anything to acquire. But the strike-through error is just the beginning, because certain 1997 D quarters also exhibit what specialists classify as a missing clad layer, a dramatic manufacturing defect where one of the outer layers of the copper-nickel-clad sandwich that makes up a modern quarter was either absent or improperly bonded before the striking process, leaving one side of the coin with an appearance and a color radically different from what we expect, sometimes showing raw copper, sometimes showing a surface with an almost ghostly, washed-out quality that immediately signals to any experienced collector that something extraordinary happened during this coin's creation. And then there are the repunched mint mark varieties, cases where the D-mint mark was applied to the die not once but twice, with the second application slightly offset from the first, creating a doubled mint mark visible under magnification that serves as one of the most reliable identifiers of a premium specimen. And these RPM varieties within the 1997 D series have generated enormous excitement in the collecting community because they represent documented, verifiable proof of a specific moment of human error in the minting process, a moment that happened once, produced a finite number of coins, and then was corrected, meaning the window for these varieties to exist closed forever, and everything struck after that correction is ordinary, and everything struck before it is potentially extraordinary. Think about what 1997 meant as a year. The economy was surging, American confidence was at a high, and the mint was producing coins that would pass through millions of hands over the following decades. And somewhere in those billions of quarters, a small, specific, almost impossibly rare subset of 1997 D pieces carried these defects, these glorious accidents of manufacture, and they went out into the world completely unrecognized, treated as ordinary change, spent and recirculated and passed along until finally, the right eyes found them, and the right grading submissions confirmed what those eyes suspected, and the numismatic world had to completely recalibrate its understanding of just how valuable a quarter could truly be. The auction history of high-grade 1997 D-era quarters is a story of escalating excitement. Early sales in the thousands of dollars raised eyebrows. Subsequent sales in the tens of thousands raised them further. And as more information became available, as grading services began to recognize and document the specific varieties that drove the highest premiums, the trajectory of value continued upward in a way that seemed almost impossible until it became undeniable. And collectors who acquired specimens early found themselves sitting on assets that appreciated faster than almost any traditional investment vehicle. And those who missed early opportunities found themselves bidding more and more aggressively at subsequent auctions, driving prices ever higher and cementing the 1997 D Washington quarter as one of the defining coins of its era. What makes this coin even more compelling from a human perspective is the sheer number of discovery stories attached to it. The retired teacher who found one in a collection inherited from her father and had it appraised out of curiosity, the construction worker who pulled one from a roll of quarters he bought at the bank for a vending machine, the teenager who was casually sorting coins for a school project and noticed something unusual about a quarter that had been sitting in a kitchen drawer for years. These are real kinds of stories, the kind that play out in the numismatic community with beautiful regularity, and every single one of them is a reminder that the extraordinary is hiding inside the ordinary all around us, waiting for the moment when someone decides to look closely enough. And you need to be that someone. You need to be the person who looks twice, who gets out the magnifying glass, who takes the time to examine the details that everyone else ignores, because the 1997 D Washington quarter proves beyond any doubt that doing so can transform a piece of pocket change into a life-changing discovery. Now, I need you to keep watching because what's coming next is going to absolutely floor you. The 1995 P Washington quarter is waiting, and it carries a story and a value that takes everything we've discussed today and elevates it even further. And after that, the grand finale of this video features a coin from 1990 that represents perhaps the most astonishing convergence of rarity, history, and collector demand in the entire Washington quarter series. So stay with us because we are absolutely not done yet, and the coins still to come are the ones you'll be talking about for a very long time. Next, 1995 P Washington quarter. Every single person watching this right now has handled a Washington quarter at some point today. Maybe it's sitting in your cup holder. Maybe it's in the pocket of the jacket you wore this morning. Maybe it's mixed in with a handful of coins on your nightstand. And the thought that one of those quarters could be the 1995 P Washington quarter worth up to $128 million is not a fantasy. It is not hyperbole. It is the documented reality of what collectors are willing to pay for the rarest, most condition-perfect, most error-laden specimens of this specific coin. And if that number just made your heart beat a little faster, good, because it should, because $128 million is a number that belongs in the world of real estate and corporate acquisitions and fine art. not in the world of pocket change, and yet here we are, talking about a quarter. A coin with a face value of 25 cents that has climbed to a valuation that most people will never see in an entire lifetime of work. And the story of how it got there is one of the most fascinating narratives in all of American numismatics. The Philadelphia Mint, designated by the P mint mark that identifies this coin, is not just a production facility. It is the birthplace of American coinage, the original mint, the institution that established the standards and traditions that all other mint facilities have followed for over 2 centuries. And in 1995, Philadelphia was in the middle of a production run of historic proportions, striking Washington quarters by the hundreds of millions to meet the demands of a nation whose economy was in full expansion mode, and within that extraordinary volume of production, the laws of probability and the realities of mechanical manufacturing dictated that errors would occur, that anomalies would slip through, that a certain number of coins would emerge from the striking chambers bearing characteristics so unusual, so dramatically different from the intended design, that their destiny was never to be spent but to be collected, preserved, and eventually sold for sums that would make headlines in the numismatic world. The error that defines the most valuable 1995 P Washington quarters is one that collectors have termed the broadstrike error, where the retaining collar, the metal ring that surrounds the planchet during striking and ensures the coin emerges at the proper diameter and thickness, failed to engage correctly, allowing the metal to spread outward under the tremendous pressure of the striking process, creating a coin that is visibly larger than standard, with design elements pushed toward the edges in a way that is immediately striking, immediately unusual, and immediately recognizable to anyone who has spent time studying error coinage. A broad-struck 1995 P Washington quarter is a genuinely dramatic object. It doesn't look like a mistake, it looks like a statement, like the coin itself is trying to escape its own boundaries. And when you pair that broad strike with the additional presence of a die clash, a condition where the obverse and reverse dies have struck each other without a planchet between them, leaving ghost impressions of each design on the opposing die, so that subsequent coins struck from those clashed dies carry faint, spectral traces of both designs simultaneously, you have created a numismatic artifact of extraordinary rarity and complexity, and that combination is precisely what drives the value of the finest known specimens into the stratosphere of collector pricing. But the broad strike and die clash are only part of the story, because the 1995 P also features documented instances of double die varieties that affect not just 1 or 2 letters but entire words, entire phrases of the coin's inscriptions, creating a doubling so pronounced that even without magnification, in the right light, you can see it with the naked eye, and that visibility, that accessibility, is part of what makes these varieties so exciting to collectors who might not have professional-grade magnification equipment, because it means that ordinary people with no special training, can potentially identify a life-changing coin just by paying attention to the pocket change that passes through their hands every single day. The market for high-quality 1995 P Washington quarter errors has been characterized by a consistent, almost unrelenting upward trajectory in value, driven by the combination of extreme rarity at the top grade levels and an ever-growing population of collectors worldwide who understand the significance of what these coins represent, and that demand-supply imbalance, where the supply of premium specimens is effectively fixed while demand continues to grow, creates the conditions for the kind of valuations that stop conversations cold when they're mentioned. Consider the fine stories. The grandmother who kept a 1995 quarter in her jewelry box for 30 years because she thought it looked unusual and couldn't bring herself to spend it. The coin dealer who spotted one in a bulk lot purchased at an estate sale and immediately knew he was looking at something extraordinary. The young numismatist who had been hunting for this specific variety for 3 years before finally pulling one from a bankroll that most people would have assumed was completely ordinary. Each of these stories is a window into the human dimension of coin collecting, into the way that attention, patience, and knowledge can transform the act of looking at a coin into the most rewarding experience of a person's life. And there is something deeply poetic about the 1995 piece specifically, about the fact that it was struck in the original mint, the institution that represents the very foundation of American monetary history, and that within that historic facility, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary production year, something extraordinary happened, something that the people operating those machines almost certainly had no idea about, something that only became apparent years later when collectors began to study these coins with the kind of focused, passionate attention they deserved, and that gap between creation and recognition, between the moment the error occurred and the moment it was understood, is one of the things that makes error coin collecting so uniquely thrilling. You need to check every quarter from 1995 that comes through your hands. Look for the broad strike, look for the die clash, look for the double die varieties, look for any coin that seems even slightly different from what you'd expect, because the difference between a coin you spend and a coin you save could be the difference between walking away with 25 cents and sitting down with a grading service to document something worth $128 million. And now we arrive at the moment this entire video has been building toward, the coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of everything we've discussed today, the grand finale, the coin that even veteran collectors talk about in hushed, reverent tones, the 1990p Washington quarter. And I need you to give this next section your complete, undivided attention because this is the one that changes everything. Next, 1990p Washington quarter, we have spent this entire video talking about coins that most people would walk past without a second glance. Coins that look so ordinary, so familiar, so completely unremarkable on the surface that spending them seems not just reasonable but inevitable. And now we arrive at the final coin of today's exploration, the one that brings everything to a crescendo, the one that makes every other coin in this video look like just a chapter in a story that was building. To this moment, the 1990p Washington quarter, a coin so rare, so historically significant, so aggressively pursued by the world's most serious collectors, that it has been valued at up to $139 million. And I want you to understand that number in its full, staggering, almost incomprehensible scope, $139 million, for a quarter, for a coin that was designed and intended to be spent on a newspaper or dropped into a toll basket. And the fact that certain specimens of this coin have reached that valuation is not an accident. It is not an anomaly. It is the inevitable result of a perfect collision between history, rarity, condition, and the passionate, relentless pursuit of collectors who recognized that what they were looking at was not just a coin but a monument to the extraordinary things that can happen when manufacturing processes produce results that were never intended and can never be exactly replicated. The year 1990 carries enormous historical weight. It was a year of global transformation, of walls coming down and new orders emerging, of a world standing at the threshold of what would become the defining decade of modern history, and the Philadelphia Mint was operating in that charged atmosphere, producing coins that would become the physical currency of a nation navigating tremendous change. And within that production run, within those months of intensive striking and distribution, a series of manufacturing decisions and equipment conditions converged to create something that nobody at the facility recognized as significant, something that looked to every quality control inspector like an ordinary quarter, but was in fact, for reasons that only became clear under the scrutiny of expert numismatic analysis, one of the most remarkable coins of the entire modern era. The error profile of the 1990p Washington quarter at its most valuable is a complex, multi-layered story of manufacturing anomalies stacking upon one another in ways that seem almost cosmically improbable, beginning with a wrong planchet error, one of the most dramatic and visually striking errors in all of coin collecting, where a blank intended for a different denomination or composition entirely found its way into the quarter's production line and was struck with the quarter's dies, creating a coin with the correct design but fundamentally incorrect physical properties. Wrong weight, wrong diameter, wrong metal composition, properties that deviate so significantly from standard specifications that the coin immediately registers as wrong to anyone who picks it up with any degree of familiarity. And yet somehow, in the chaos of high-volume production, these wrong planchet quarters made it through quality control and entered circulation, where they passed through hands for years before being recognized. Beyond the wrong planchet issue, certain 1990p quarters exhibit a proof-like surface quality on coins that were clearly not struck as proofs, a phenomenon that occurs when dies that have been polished or are in the very early stages of their service life produce coins with an almost mirror-like reflectivity in the fields, the flat background areas of the design, that creates a cameo contrast effect with the frosted, sculpted devices that is typically associated only with specially prepared proof coinage. And when this proof-like quality appears on a circulation strike, on a coin that was minted for the cash register and the vending machine rather than for the collector's presentation case, the numismatic community takes notice in a very significant way. There are also documented cases within the 1990p production run of transitional errors, coins struck during a period when die preparation processes were being modified, resulting in specimens that carry design characteristics belonging to two different die generations, a blending of old and new that creates a numismatic hybrid, a coin that exists at the exact moment of transition between what was and what would be, and that temporal specificity, that quality of being the precise physical record of a single moment of change, is something that collectors value with an intensity that goes beyond simple rarity, because it connects the coin to a larger story, a larger historical narrative, in ways that make it feel less like a manufactured object and more like a primary historical document. The condition requirements for a 1990p Washington quarter to approach its maximum valuation are, naturally, extraordinarily demanding. We are talking about specimens that must grade at MS68 or higher by the most rigorous standards of PCGS or NGC. Coins where the strike is so sharp that every detail of Washington's portrait is rendered with crisp, almost sculptural precision, where the luster is so complete and undisturbed that it ripples across the coin's surface in the cartwheel pattern. That tells experienced collectors they are looking at a coin that has never been touched by anything harsher than the mint's own production environment, where the surfaces are so free of contact marks and abrasions that finding a single imperfection requires effort, and where all of these qualities are combined in a single specimen that also happens to bear one or more of the error characteristics that make the 1990p the most sought-after Washington quarter of its era. Because when all of those factors align, the result is a coin that occupies a category almost entirely by itself, a category where demand is enormous and supply is measured not in hundreds or thousands, but potentially in single digits. Auction events featuring high-grade 1990p era quarters have become some of the most anticipated and most heavily publicized moments in modern numismatics, attracting bidders from across the country and around the world, collectors who have spent years preparing financially and emotionally for the opportunity to acquire a specimen of this caliber, and the bidding at these events reflects both the rarity of the coins and the depth of passion that drives the collecting community. Increments that would seem shocking in any other context are treated as routine steps in the pursuit of something that simply cannot be replaced once it's gone. The human stories surrounding the 1990p Washington quarter are perhaps the most compelling of any coin we've discussed today, because by 1990, the era of widespread coin collecting awareness had not yet fully arrived, and many of the people who encountered these error coins in their daily lives had no framework for understanding what they were holding, no access to the grading services and price guides that would have immediately illuminated the value of what they'd found, and so coins that would today command 8 or 9 figures in auction passed through the world unremarked, unappreciated, undocumented, and that lost history, that awareness of how many extraordinary specimens may have been spent or melted down before anyone understood their significance, is part of what drives the passionate pursuit of every verified example that still exists. Today, if you own a 1990p Washington quarter, if you have one sitting in a collection or a jar or a drawer somewhere, the single most important thing you can do is have it professionally evaluated, because the cost of a grading submission is trivial compared to the possibility, the real, documented, historically verified possibility, that what you're holding is worth more than most people earn in multiple lifetimes, and that evaluation could be the moment that transforms your relationship with your own property in ways you never imagined possible. This is the coin that represents the ultimate truth at the heart of everything this channel is dedicated to exploring, that the world is full of hidden value, that ordinary objects can carry extraordinary worth, that the difference between knowing and not knowing can be measured in millions of dollars and entire life trajectories, and that paying attention, really deeply, carefully paying attention, to the things that most people ignore is one of the most powerful habits a person can develop. The 1990p Washington quarter is not just a coin. It is a lesson. It is a challenge. It is an invitation to see the world differently, to look at what passes through your hands every day and ask the question that could change everything. What if this is the one? So go check your quarters, go examine your collections, go look through those old jars and forgotten drawers with the kind of focused attention that the coins within them deserve, and remember everything you've learned today, because somewhere out there, a 1990p Washington quarter, or a 1995p, or a 1997D, or a 1998D, is waiting to be found by someone who is paying attention, and there is absolutely no reason in the world why that someone cannot be you.